Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of Co-Angler's Corner, brought to you by Olson Home Theater. I'm Russell Olson. Today on the show I want to talk about something that not only affects co-anglers, but actually anyone who puts a rod and reel in their hand, and that's hook setting. Now, the reason I wanted to do this episode on hook setting was because about a little over a month ago now, I fished a tournament up on the Mississippi River. In day 2 we were fishing frogs over slop. And neither me nor my partner I was with, neither one of us could keep a fish on. I mean, both of us had to have lost at least 15 to 70 pounds worth of bass that day. It was insane. So that's kind of my inspiration behind doing this show today. And what I'm going to tell you in this episode, can be subjective. Everybody has their own ideas on setting the hook. How you should reel it in, how you should reel them back. So it's kind of subjective, but I'm just going to tell you what I've learned, what my experiences are, and hopefully it'll help you get more fish to the boat. Now, the first thing is, no matter what bait I'm using, what I like to do is when I set the hook, give it at least a half a dozen cranks, just as fast as you can, just every bit of speed you can put in it, because what that does is after you get them hooked, it keeps some momentum going to get that hook buried into them a little bit further. So again, so you can have better success keeping those fish on. Now, what I want to go into is basically some bait specific instructions on how I like to set the hook, and some things that I've learned about setting the hook with these baits. First one I want to talk about is the Senko. Okay. Now, what I'm going to tell you here, to me it doesn't matter whether it's Texas rigged or wacky rigged. For me, the same rule applies. I would say that this bait is probably one of the more forgiving baits when it comes to hook setting, because I just feel like when a fish attacks this thing, they don't let it go. I don't recall ever having a fish spit it out on me, ever. I mean, when it sucks it in, they just don't let it go, probably because of how soft it is. And many of these Senkos are all salt impregnated, so that they probably like the taste of it. I'm not sure what it is totally 100% about what makes them hold on to it so well, but they do. And with the Senkos, I like to, especially if it's not weighted, I like when I'm retrieving it or throwing it out and just letting it fall, I like to keep my rod tip pretty high, so it makes it easier. I feel like not only makes it easier to see the line so I can see the little twitch, but I feel like it helps me feel bites a little bit better. So and since this is such a forgiving bait, that's what allows me to do that. So I'm throwing it out, it sinks, I feel bite. I reel down till I feel tension. Once I feel just the slightest hint of tension or weight, boom, and give it those cranks, initial cranks. Don't waste no time with that. So like I said, these are usually the most. They hold longer. It's just a real easy bait to set the hook with. There's not really much else to say about that. Next type of bait I want to talk about is like, for example, your jigging pigs, your Texas rigged worms or tubes, any bait, Texas rig or retrieve. Both Texas rigged worms, tubes, and jigs, a lot of them you work in the same manner. For me, I don't quite hold my rod quite as high with those, simply because I want to keep that line. Number one, keep the line taut so I can still help me feel bites. But with these, these and even tubes or plastic worms, you just don't have the same amount of time, I feel like, to set the hook. that you do with with like the Senko, for example. You really got to pay attention. So I mean, you feel a bite, you see a line move the wrong way, anything. I mean, you got to do this as quickly as possible. You reel down when you feel the weight, and just start cranking. I'd say it's a lot in the same manner as you would with the Senko, but you've definitely got to do it a lot faster. And I mean a lot faster, because it seems like with these baits and even the soft plastic tubes and worms, I just feel like that they spit it out a lot faster. So you don't have quite the same amount of time to be able to set the hook and get that hook in them. So the next type of bait I want to talk about is, like for example, your buzz baits, your spinner baits, chatter baits, those type of baits. With these, you're really retrieving them almost constantly, with the exception of like with the spinner bait or buzz or chatter bait, where sometimes you'll yo-yo. But in general, you're really either steady retrieving it, or you're just retrieving it. So your line's pretty taut as it is. So it's pretty straightforward. You feel a fish come after it, boom, set the hook. Simple. That's just gotta get them, get the hook in them. That's all you gotta do. I mean, the only thing with these is if you're sometimes, especially when you're retrieving fast, they'll come up and you'll just miss it. That's why I like to, especially during the tournament, if I'm just out fun fishing or even pre-fishing for a tournament, it's not quite as big a deal. But if I'm fishing a tournament and I've got a spinner bait, chatter bait, well, chatter bait maybe not so much because of the way that I run the trailer on mine. But definitely with buzz bait or spinner bait, if I'm in a tournament, that stinger hook, excuse me, that stinger hook is on there, because sometimes, especially if you're reeling them fast, sometimes the bass will bite it short, and that happens. Now the next type of bait I want to talk about is anything with treble hooks. And what I mean by treble hooks, that right there, that's considered a treble hook. It's basically one hook, but it's got 3 hook points on them. And many baits like this one have 2. A lot of crankbaits generally have 2. Jerk baits can have 2 or 3. Basically any type of bait, or walking bait can have 2 or 3. When I'm talking about walking bait, it's basically a stick bait. It just moves like this when you're retrieving it right. Anything with this type of hook, number one, I like my fiberglass rod. I've got a Skeet Reese Wright McCargill fiberglass rod I use for most of my baits with treble hooks on them. Tricky thing is, number one, setting the drag. These type of baits, because if you've got your drag too tight or you're using too stiff a rod, you'll rip these hooks right out of their mouth. I don't know why it is, but it's just so easily done. So especially with these type of baits, you want a rod with a little bit of give to it. Medium action. Fiberglass rod for these type of baits is ideal. But I mean, you can use graphite rods with them, obviously. Just I would say I do have a tendency to set my drag just a little bit looser with these, because I don't want the hook coming out. But when you're retrieving these, it's actually pretty similar to a spinnerbait, where you pretty much got some sort of constant movement, whether you're burning it or you're just stopping, starting, stopping, starting. Your line in general is pretty taut, so you're not going to have problems, knowing when you got a fish on. But when I cranking along, stopping or whatever, all of a sudden I feel weight. I don't reel down and set it like I would normally, like a worm or Senko or Texas Rig tube or Jig and Pig, whatever. With that, I prefer more of a sweeping hook set. Basically, I'm feeling them, and I just pull back I still, like I said, I still crank about a half dozen times, but you know, when you're starting after that, you start to slow down. You want to keep the tension. You want to keep the tension. You feel it coming off reeling fast, but you know, sometimes you just got to take your time on those type of baits with these treble hooks on them, because if you try to reel them in too fast, or like I said, if you got your drag set too tight, or you're using too stiff a rod, you will rip these hooks right out. No question. So now that leads me into our spotlight bait for this episode, and basically the inspiration for this whole episode: topwater frog. This particular frog is it's actually not the Spro Kermit. It's actually kind of a knockoff, but it's very similar to the Spro. Dean Rojas calls them Kermits. With this bait, and actually pretty much most other topwaters that you use in a similar manner to this, thing of it is, you're going to see that fish blow up. And when you see that fish blow up, the first thing you're going to want to do is jerk. That's the first thing you're going to want to do, and that's the thing you don't want to do. You don't want to see jerk just as soon as you hear that whoosh. You don't want to do that. Now you want to do this with some speed, but you want to reel down till you feel weight. Don't set that hook. When you feel weight, then set it. And then now, when you're fishing with these, you're usually fishing with them in slop or very, very heavy vegetation. Where basically the only other option to this would be, flipping and pitching a Texas rig, plastic, or a jig. But when you're setting hook with these, like I said, do not set the hook immediately when you see the boil up. Now, what you want to do immediately when you see the boil up, reel your line down, and then the second you feel weight, just wail on it. And then with this type of bait, you're using braid. I've learned that you don't want to use mono. Mono has too much give to it. You want to use braided line, like a spider wire. That's just an example. I know a lot of companies make a lot of good braids, but the one I personally use, and specifically this season, I've been using a spider wire camel, and it's about 10-pound diameter, but it's like 50-pound test. And when you set the hook on this is one bait where you don't want to take your time. Set that hook, keep on coming. Don't let them get in the weeds. Keep on coming. Get them to the boat. Don't waste any time. Because, especially if you're not using braid, because braid will rip through the weeds fairly efficiently. But, if a fish wraps you up in a big bunch of weeds, you're going to have some problems. So, now, since this is our spotlight bait for this episode, I want to go into some other things about how it's used, some ways of retrieving it. One thing I learned, and it's already a tip that's already proven its weight in gold. When you get one of these, the hook on these, I notice how the hook on this particular one is bent up. That's the reason it's bent up like that a little bit, because I bent it up. You want to, when you get these, because they're usually it just seems like they're usually in and down. Take a pair of pliers, bend them up and out. At maybe a 45-degree angle. Bend them up and out, up and out. That alone should help your hook setting, because with a lot of these, your hooks are almost going not necessarily poking into the plastic, but they're going into the plastic, and after learning about bending the hooks out, I can see why that's going to make it easier for the hook to get set in a fish's mouth. Now, how I like to retrieve these, it really depends on what I'm doing. And there's various retrieves I'll try. First, I'll go over type retrieve I like to use when I'm running it through matted vegetation, any type of visible vegetation. First type of retrieve I like to try is just steadily bringing it across. There's times when the fish will hit it that way. There's times when they want it that way. Just bring it steady across. Other times, otherwise I'll make it almost hop. By what I'll do is a friend of mine taught me. I was doing that with the rod tip up. I learned it's better to do it with the rod tip down. I'm not sure if it makes it look more natural, but it just seems to work better and it's more attractive to the fish. You're just basically and you can try different cadences like that. You can do a constant. You can do a and let it sit. Let it sit. Let it sit. A lot of times, especially sometimes if I'm getting like to the edge of a weed line, and it's coming, and the weed line's starting to go down in the water, I'll maybe sometimes let this sit for like a half a second, just right on the edge, and then retrieve it, back through the open water. Now, when I'm running this type of bait in open water, because these do work in open water, you don't have to have matted vegetation for these to work. Ask Dean Rojas. But what I want to do with this bait when I'm working in open water, I don't want it to work very similar to a walking bait, where it's just going back and forth, 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 back and forth. So that's what I like to see when I'm using it in open water. So as far as colors, I'm still a little baffled on that, to be honest with you, because I personally do like natural colors, like your browns, your greens. Now I found like on the Mississippi River, for example, whites or blacks, tend to sometimes work better. And I mean, I can understand the white having the white bottom on it because it's natural. Because frogs generally do have a white bottom on that, or on their bottom side like that. But the black I don't quite get, but I've just seen it work. That's the reason I'm telling you, because I've seen it with my own eyes, with fishing it with the other guys. I do like the Spro Kermits, but there are other ones like I said, this one right here. It's a kind of a knockoff. I forget who even makes it, but I do like these frogs. Now, one thing I've done, maybe I think I might have cut this one a little too short, but a tip that I seen on, I think it was on one of the Bassmaster shows, to cut one frogs with these almost spinnerbait type skirts for legs, cut one just a little shorter than the other. And I think that has to do with making it work better when you're working in open water. Well, I hope everything we talked about today helps you catch more fish from the back of the boat. I'd like to thank my sponsor, Frugal Muse Books. If you could mention Coin West Corner when you go to check out, I would appreciate that. And if you'd like to get paid when people pay their bills and help some starving children get fed here in America, email me at olsonhometheater@gmail.com. And we'll see you next episode, and wish you luck from the back of the boat.